It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 507 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record where I hold in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership 6 days a week. Joining me on Accelerate today is Mitch Morando. He's the founder and CEO of Whalr. That's spelled W-H-A-L-R, no E there. Whalr specializes in helping sales teams identify what it calls product qualified leads. So PQLs are a different take on new business development with enterprise buyers. So I'm anxious to learn what it's all about. So let's jump into it. Mitch Morando, welcome to Accelerate.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me. I have to start off with a quick story.
Oh, by all means, start with a story.
Because this literally happened to me yesterday, so it's top of mind. And I love when these things sort of happen. But I was the Challenger sale was used on me by a taxi driver yesterday, which was incredible.
Now, wait. What was the taxi driver selling?
Yeah, so I'm on my way home. We have this rule in the family: I've got to be home by 7:00, right? Or I sleep on the couch because it's dinner time. Can't miss dinner.
Okay, excellent.
So I've a cab just happened to be in front of me. So instead of grabbing an Uber or Lyft, I kind of happened to hop in this cab, and I'm like, hey, I'm going up to this part of town. I've done it, hundreds of times. And I say, just take Pine Street, go straight on up. And he goes, no, that's not the right way to go right now. He goes, this time of day, you're going to get the Powell Street cable car. It's going to back everything. He was like, that's not the best way. We got to go over here, go down Chinatown, go Broadway Tunnel. He's like, much faster. And I go, no, I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm like, just go up Pine Street. Like, save me the argument. Right. He's like, no, I'm not going to go that way. The cable car is going to screw up everything. And I go, will you just please go up Pine Street? He goes, no, I'm not going to go that way. You need to get out of my cab. I go, really? Like, you feel that strongly about it? And he's like, yes. I go, okay, well, how about this? I know it typically takes me about 13, 14 minutes to get home, so let's time it, and we're going to take your way. And so he goes, sure enough, he's like, he takes his way, goes down Broadway Tunnel. I found a new way through the city, which was interesting. And lo and behold, we got there at about the same time, 14, but there was much less traffic at that particular time of day. And I was so ecstatic, right? Like that he'd used a Challenger sale on me. The guy had been driving a cab in the city for a lot of years, and the cab fare was whatever, $10, $12. And I just gave him a 50. I was like, that was so awesome because A, you taught me something, and B, you stuck to your guns, and you are a taxi driver that knows the city very well. So thank you for teaching me something new, and keep the change. So that was my Challenger sale from a taxi driver. It was incredible. The man knew how to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, he knew the city, he knew the subject matter, he actually knew you as a customer more than you thought he did. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Very interesting. And as you said, as a bonus, you learned a new way through the city. Though I would surprise you didn't know about the Broadway Tunnel.
Well, at that particular point in time, right? Like I do, and I do get stuck on Pine Street from the cable car occasionally. Yeah. But he's like, this particular point in time, nope. So it was great.
Which is interesting. We compare that to the typical Uber Lyft experience, which is it's just in their app, and they're just following the GPS.
They're not, almost blindly, right?
They're not exercising any sort of initiative whatsoever. So
yeah,
right.
And the dot stops there, so I've just stopped on the dot. Like, no, you need to pull over because you're blocking traffic. And I always call them and say, I'm gonna walk up, a block, and I'll meet you at that corner because there's less traffic or whatever. And I'm surprised the companies don't actually teach the passengers a little bit more about walking, half a block will actually save you probably a heck of a lot of time than trying to stay on the dot. But
yeah,
for another time.
Another time. All right. So, opening question for you is sort of standard question. I ask a lot of my guests is, so in your mind today, what's the single biggest challenge facing sales reps?
Single biggest challenge always, I'd say, is training. Right. I think by far the more the reps that I come into contact with, they just haven't been taught properly, like the fundamentals first and foremost. And certainly today, I mean, I'm in the technology sales enablement business, and still I think no amount of technology is ever going to replace like the fundamentals of just being trained, in good sales technique and the professionalism of sales. I think there's a lot of alarming trends that are really making the sales profession, I think, exceptionally diluted right now. So
what are these alarming trends?
I'd say one in particular that that really alarms me is the emphasis around this SDR function, right? The sales development rep, business development rep, whatever you call it. And really the trend that this is in essence a career, right? And really in sort of my view of the world, there's two things in a business. You build stuff, so software, so you ship code, and then the other side of the fence, you ship revenue, right? So the whole company is aligned with one of those two key functions, right?
Right.
In the sales profession, shipping code or shipping revenue is, selling. It's closing, right? It's being able to learn how to do all those things that you and I have learned over the years. And I think the BDR as a profession is that you're basically learning the first part of in your sales career. Yeah, you got to learn how to prospect and start conversations and do all those good things, but you never learn the part to actually close, right? And I've had this conversation probably 4 or 5 times over the last month or so, and I really feel bad for these young salespeople because they're 1 year into their SDR training, and then their boss or manager says, "Hey, you've got 2 options. You can either go A, into the closing role." Ooh, kind of scary. You have to have a commission. No, never done that before. Or B, you can become a BDR manager. And of course, you're taking advantage of a young professional where they can go back to their friends and their families. Hey, I'm a manager now, right? Like that's really tempting to not be really accept that kind of direction. Right. And you're a step further from the ultimate goal, which is closing, to really understand whether you want to be a sales professional. So, the conversation I've had, they're 2, 3, 4 years into the SDR manager, never closed before, and now they say, "I really want to get into sales now, Mitch." And I tell them, you unfortunately, a real disservice has been done to you. And in order to get into sales, you're going to have to go back to ground zero. And I would recommend you just get into any role that you can where you are selling anything. I don't care if it's books, pots, tour guide, anything. Just get into the function of actually closing small little deals, doesn't matter whatever it is, because until you actually start closing, you are not actually doing the sales. You're not doing the sales role. So SDR as a career, I guess, is the thing that's most alarming to me. But
well, and I want to explore that a little bit because, yeah, I think part of the disservice we do too is and sort of following what you're talking about is we define these things so poorly, right? So you talk about the closer role. I mean, to me, I hate that description because first of all, how often have you been in the room when the customer makes a decision?
Right.
So this idea, when you say a closer, what people automatically think is we're getting somebody that's going to go in and they're closing the deal, right? In the sort of stereotypical sense. Yep. Which, is not what happens. Right. And really what that role is, that's a discovery role. That's it's a understanding the customer role. It's putting together the right solution role. And if you do that appropriately, the customer is going to buy from you. Mm-hmm. And closing has nothing to do with it.
Exactly.
And so it seems like we have to sort of, you had a very clear distinction, right? We do 2 things in a company. We develop code, we ship code, in software. You can say in sales, you only have 2 things really that a company does that acquires customers and retains them. Is how do we fit those roles into those functions, right? And I agree with you. I think we're doing a huge disservice to a broad swath of people that are new to the sales profession because just for things you talked about is we say either, we're going to make you a manager, or the third option is, if you're lucky, you might become a quote unquote account manager in customer success, which is still considered a lower form of life in some of the sales organizations compared to the account execs or closers, which is also nuts because they're the ones generating the majority of the revenue.
Right, exactly. It is, and I think again, it's down to the sales leaders also that are promoting this. Where really now what I've seen be very effective, because you also have this snowball effect where you have people who've never closed before coaching young new talent in the sales profession, but they don't actually know what it is to do sales, right?
Right. But they have the data.
Yeah, right. So, again, you're perpetuating the problem. But where I have seen it be very effective is if you get into that SDR role, right? You really shouldn't be in that role for 6 months, maybe a year, maybe if you're not. And we can talk about some ways that you can get out of that role. But if you go into sales and then, if you try closing, you figure out whether you really like it, whether you excel at it, you go do that for a year, and then you come back in and you coach SDRs, that's okay. Because again, I've seen that be very effective because you're coaching, you're also trying to identify early talent to accelerate people into the AE role, or coach them in the right way that they can learn, the skill set and where they need to excel to ultimately get into the AE role. But the idea of SDR as a career path is, to me, just absurd. And it's down to the sales leaders. The folks need to really understand that it's a progression into ultimately the role of being a sales professional.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in some ways it mirrors a little bit what happened back in the, let's say, the 80s when IBM and Xerox and all the other big companies were every year would go out and hire thousands of fresh college grads, put them into these quote unquote, marketing management or sales management training programs with the idea that they were going to wash out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of them over the course of the next 2 years. And what we left is the people that they want to keep. And it seems like this is just a new version of that.
Right. Yeah. Or the people that didn't necessarily fit their model of what they think a salesperson should be, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the other big disservice is around, there are lots of different styles of being a very good sales professional, right? I mean, I have my own biases. I have a technical background. I tend to hire and like people who have mathy, more technical backgrounds, because I think in technology, they tend to be more curious and they tend to just want to know why things happen. Like, customer just bought from me. Why? Exactly. I got to go ask them. I don't know. I'm just going to go ask. So I have my own biases, but I also have hired and worked with lots of people that have non-technical backgrounds. So I think there are so many different ways to be successful in sales. There is no just right way to do it. And I think that's also part of, you have obviously some core fundamental traits, but I love getting people that other teams do not like. I tend to like those folks. I don't know. I do have friends that are building particular type of sales teams. And if I come across one, I'm like, you need to go talk to Jim or Jane, right? Like, you'll fit in right there. And I go, Jim or Jane, anyone that doesn't really fit your stereotypical, I'm like, send them my way. I'm like, I tend to find that those, misfits, or those people that just don't do the typical sales approach, in my view, can be exceptional, can be really good. But it's a lot of ways you can do it.
Right, but I think one of the reasons that's the case, and this is becoming a more of a theme on this particular show, is meaning Accelerate, is that we have these very tightly defined roles increasingly in sales, and certainly in the tech sales world. And part of the reason then we sit there and wonder why some people don't perform well, given how narrowly we circumscribe their responsibilities and what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be doing it, that the power of the individual gets lost, right? The power of the individual to sort of do things their way. Because it's always like, well, it's got to be this way. And it's like, well, okay, that's that way. You've got one sample set, and believe me, you may be growing quickly, but the bulk of your salespeople are still not cutting it. Right. Why is that the right way? Why not give people some more latitude so they can develop their individual strengths? And so you have this opportunity, as you said, the people you consider sort of the misfits. I'm with you. I always wanted to hire the misfits because you bring me somebody with a stereotypical sales background, and they just never did it for me.
And I think you always, in your entire sales career, the best people I've always seen, they're always coachable, kind of at any stage. I love learning from somebody else who's very good at sales and learning new ways or new techniques or new ways that you might be able to approach a particular sales opportunity. So I think those. So
isn't that to me, that's one of the real risks I see in a lot of the sales models that people are implementing these days, is that it's like just too rigid. Right, and there's no freedom for the individual to really sort of be themselves.
Yes, or develop their style. Right,
develop their style. All right, that's a better way of putting it. Absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, you still have to be, right. I mean, this obviously. It's a sales profession, very regimented. It's very process driven. You still have to it's grinded out, and you still have to do a lot of these things. But you're right. There should be a lot of latitude in sort of how you get there, and openness to experiment, because everyone will have a style that they develop ultimately on their own that they find works very well for them.
Yeah, I mean, when I was new in sales, I certainly did not fit the mold at all. In fact, my first boss that hired me was extremely clear about the fact that he had never hired anybody like me before, and wasn't really sure that he should have hired me. But I had an interesting interview experience. So, okay, great. But yeah, it turned out well, right? Because he took a risk.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. And I think that is also separates great managers and great heads of sales that can identify talent, right? It's the same on the engineering side of the fence, but of course, there are some particular traits you look for, but there are being able to identify that talent and then coach the talent, right? And I don't know, I have, the A players are always going to be the A players and they'll kind of do their thing, but can you, as a sales leader, can you get the most out of can you get your C players up to be B players, right? That's where you can make the biggest impact. And a lot of that is in just coaching to the style, right? You can't coach everybody the same way. You got to coach to the style and to the strengths of that particular person. So I think just that comes down to good sales leadership and good sales management, where you run into those types of people and they are the real difference makers in how effective a sales team can be.
Well, and I think that you identified sort of a missing piece, because increasingly we're seeing apps and technologies come up, a lot of the AI-driven things, saying, okay, what we're going to be able to help you do is really understand precisely what your A players are doing, right? Because we can record the calls and parse them and apply our algorithms to them, and so the B players can listen to it. They'll know exactly what the A players are doing, so they can be just like the A players.
Great,
but that doesn't work, right? I mean, the A players. Great, you can listen to what they're doing with their calls and you might pick up some interesting tips, but the fact is, part of the reason the A players is because they're not playing by the rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that I find sort of the conundrum that's so interesting in so many sales organizations, is that, the real disciplines are applied, not the disciplines, the sort of the rigid formulas are applied to the B and C players, and the A's. Right, and the A's are the ones that have earned the right to be a little more flexible, a little more free, but then they sort of suppress that in the B's and C's, which is really, as you said, that's sort of the next generation of strength that's coming from. And you want to be able to develop your bench. If you think that, because sales people turn over really quickly, if you think that you're always going to replace your A players by going outside, that's a horrible strategy.
Right. Yes.
You need to develop. That's not sustainable. You need to be able to develop your B's and C's to take the place of the A's when they go.
Right. And of course, you're only getting a very small snippet of the time slice, right, of a particular A player. Right. You're not seeing everything that they're doing, throughout the entire sales cycle, which is the majority of the work. Right.
Exactly.
So I totally agree with you. You've got to be a good manager. You really got to be in the trenches, and you've got to coach, and you've got to give people the options to try things and see. Here are what people are doing. Here are some things to try. Let's go see if it works, and let's go see if we can improve this particular part of your sales experience that maybe needs a little bit of work.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk for a second about your company, Whalr.
Sure.
So what was the impetus to start Whalr?
So Whalr, funny enough, again, engineering background. So when I got into sales after banging out code for a while, I took a very different approach to. I wasn't classically sales trained, so I took a very different approach to how I was going to do sales myself, and then start to build sales teams. And a lot of, I think probably it was, in the early days, I also we sold enterprise software into game developers. Mm-hmm. And so I just got exposed to a lot of, I liked video games. I still like video games, and how games were developed. And game development is just fascinating. I've never seen a more extreme industry, where you have the extreme of the creative people, like the people that are way out there, right? And then on the flip side of the fence, you have the hardest core of hardcore engineers, because they're building, every 4 years on proprietary software. They're building on the hardware, right, on the metal. So you're talking about assembly programmers, like really, really hardcore engineers. So these two totally extremes, and they come together and they build this completely complex 3D real-time thing, right? And it's fun to play. It's amazing that these games even can come to fruition, and there's a reason so many of them flop, because they're so incredibly complicated. But anyway, I got exposed into how they would develop player telemetry systems, and how they would use a lot of we see players going here. Okay, let's put in this particular, drop point, or this particular the gameplay, or let's tweak this. And I thought, well, man, why can't I do that in sales? I'd love to, if I could see what users and what prospects were doing inside my product, like, to me, that would give me all the context into why and how I needed to reach out to them, because I could say, well, yeah, I see you've used this particular part of the product, but I think I know your use case, given that I know you and your company and what you're trying to do. So that gives me a reason to reach out to you and teach you something about maybe the best way to use my particular product. So usage behavior for me, what that prospect was doing inside your product was really the most important data point that I found that for me as a salesperson was the most effective, right, in helping me kind of teach. So that concept, I started to just build that into my sales teams and monitoring a lot of in-product usage. And ultimately, I implemented that at a few sales teams, and then quite a few other teams that I work with, and we took that concept and pulled it into a platform called Whalr about just over a year ago that we officially launched it. And really, that's our focus. A customer called us Moneyball for sales, so I kind of like that. But really, our customers today primarily are open source. Well, the biggest pain point today is open source, freemium, premium, so enterprise SaaS products where they usually have the in-product usage readily available. And we monitor all that and push that out to particular sales rep and say, hey, this is interesting behavior about either this user, or more interestingly in the enterprise is groups, and what the group behavior is, because you may, if you have 3 or 5 or 7 users that all of a sudden become very active within a product over a specific period of time, let's say a 7-day or a 14-day period, that's interesting. And that's really when, me as a salesperson, I want to now engage and go teach them something because the timing's right. So
okay, so you work with
Whalr.
Right. So your product then works with or companies that use your product are companies that SaaS companies have, you said, a free trial or freemium model of some sort. So, you talk about generating leads, helping land leads, and so on, and you use phrase convert data to identity intelligence. So, and so what's that mean in the case of somebody that hasn't even got that point of signing up for the the free trial? So, do you do anything before that, or it all starts at that point?
No, it all starts once the user has signed up, either and signed into the product. So for us, that's a key starting point. And even in my own sales career, using data pre-sign-in, right? Like downloading white papers, attending webinars, not typically a very strong signal for me personally as a salesperson. I wanted to know, okay, once they got in the product, okay, that's still starting to get interesting, but I want to see what they do, right? Because a lot of times, especially in these freemium or open source models, you may want customers to just sit there for a while. They're not ready yet. The biggest challenge in sales is just getting the timing right, and understanding when they're actually at a point where they're open to having the conversation and being taught. Sometimes you just can't chase the person who just signs up and is starting to use your product just because they may fit some firmographic data. There may be a reason to just wait until 3 months later, when all of a sudden user 2, 3, 4, 5 comes in over a short period of time. Maybe that's the right time to reach out. So. Those are some of the things, a lot of things that we monitor and try and service to the sales rep to help them highlight that.
And so, what does the rep receive back from Whalr? So, it integrates with Salesforce, obviously. So they get that information automatically updating to their contact record or something.
We do, yeah. We call it intel, right? So we basically monitor all of this, and then when we see something interesting, we push that piece of intel into Salesforce. And usually it's we can do it over email or over an API through our API, but the goal is to get it in front of the rep in whatever workflow that they're already, is already pre-existing, and tell them, okay, this interesting thing is happening now. Here's why. Context is really important, right? I've never been a big believer of black boxes and just kind of, the magical machine learning that to me doesn't really exist. It has to be we spend a lot of time working directly with the sales reps to understand, okay, what are things that they think are interesting? And then we'll use that human interaction along with, you can scale it a little bit faster and experiment more by using the machine learning, but certainly there has to be a lot of human intuition and hands-on understanding that needs to go into this, and providing that context to the sales rep then gives them all the information they need and sort of how they need to reach out, and interact with that particular prospect.
Well, let's talk about the context. So what is the context you're setting for them? So, somebody's using it, but is it based on, the history of what past similar people have done and so on, and you're sort of aggregating a history, or how's the context established?
Yep. So good example, we have these different intel types I mentioned. So for instance, one we call the Trojan horse, right? So the Trojan horse intel basically will, we have some out of the box settings, but we kind of configure it for the team. But for argument's sake, we'd say, okay, whenever we see at least 4 users from a particular company, they might sign up and use their business domain. They might sign up and use a Gmail. It doesn't matter. We'll be able to identify them and pull them all together. But let's say we see 4 users that have finally signed up and started using the product within a 7-day period, so a short period of time, high activity within a short period of time, and it meets all of the firmographic criteria. So typically that means, it's a North American company, employee size greater than 50 employees, and that then we would package up and say, all right, we basically have a Trojan horse hiding, a group of high qualified users that now sales rep will either, if we have a decision maker that's identified in there, we'll highlight that and say, you should probably call this VP because they just started to use the product, 2 days ago.
So with just an email address, you're doing some sort of data enrichment, so you're being able to pull out titles and, as you said, they were using a personal email versus business, and you can correlate that back to the business.
Exactly. There's a lot between email, but most importantly, we kind of flip it. We don't look at the person first. We monitor for the user behavior first, because again, if somebody signs up and let's say it's Mitch at Whalr, I sign up and okay, I'm at Whalr and or 10 employees and X firmographic data, not necessarily rationale to just go out and reach out to me, right? Now. So what we'll do first is we look for the usage pattern of the behavior first to then highlight, okay, is this an interesting person that's doing something interesting, or is this a group that's doing something interesting? And if it is, then we'll go out and say, all right, does this then fit our demographic and firmographic filters? So it's kind of flipped. We look for the behavior first, and then we go out and say, like, okay, is this some students in Indonesia, or is this actually a good B2B prospect that we might have in North America? So it's a little bit different in that method, but the key is usage pattern first, and then as you mentioned, being able to go out and pull together all the firmographic and demographic information.
So are you seeing on your customers that, because increasingly I see is that where it used to be easy to sign up for a free trial, increasingly companies are forcing you to talk to somebody in sales before you sign up for a free trial. I mean, you see that as a trend, and is that based on data that they're experiencing through their own experience that higher close rates if they have to go through a sales as first step? Because in some cases, quite frankly, I find it really off-putting, and I won't do won't do the free trial if I have to talk to somebody in sales as opposed to just signing up for it.
It is. It's I find it's mostly a function of the sales leader that comes in. I mean, usually these models start off as these freemium self-servicing models, and at some point they might get to 10 or 20 million in revenue, and they say, okay, now we need to go hire a sales team, right, in order to get to the next tier. And usually the sales leader comes in and they go, well, I can't see anything that's going on in this freemium, even premium, let's call it credit card side of the business. I'm blind, so I'm competing against myself. Shut it off. Right, put up the hard stop top. At least talk to sales. Right, so it's usually that the sales leader just hasn't worked in a open source or freemium to premium credit card and then to the enterprise model. Like there really have been very few successful companies that have done that. And as a sales leader, it's usually just the first reaction. So that to me is, and a lot of what we have to do is just educate, because if we can go into a sales leader and say, hey, we can give you visibility, or the revenue leader, the sales and marketing side of the fence, and say, hey, we can, like, really the freemium and credit card side of the business, that is all lead gen. Like, if you can mine that and let it grow and leverage it, then it becomes a huge advantage to then the enterprise side. As long as you're surfacing up only the small percentage that actually is now enterprise ready. But once you start to tell that story and explain how we can do that, then the sales leader typically understands. Oh, great. Okay, this is actually this is an amplifier.
Absolutely.
In addition to this inbound machine I have. Because you're always going to have to do inbound and outbound, right? There's very few instances where you get the luxury of one. It's always this, you're going to have this balance of doing both. But the education piece is probably the first one, because it's conceptually using the product usage in that way is not typically very intuitive to people that we come across. So education is a big piece of what we have to do.
So who's your ideal client profile then?
Today, it's very specific. It's Bay Area. I don't want to travel. Right. Well, no, it's more that take advantage of the 7th largest economy in the world, right? So, of course, there are always exceptions, but
of course, primarily that's really California. That's the 7th largest. But yeah, okay, go ahead.
Yes, right. It's split between northern pretty evenly, but I preach this a lot. Like, you got to own your own backyard, even if your startup's in Boise, Idaho, or whatever. Like, focus in Boise, Idaho. Focus in your backyard, because you got to be able to get customer face time. Right, and in the learning too. We need to go in. Like I said, we work a lot with the reps. We need to learn a lot as we're continuing to build this platform. So ideally, it's Bay Area and developer focused. So if they're dev first, open source models are pretty good. Freemium models, DevOps, any sort of engineering development platforms. That's where the pain's the biggest. Mm-hmm. Because you really have, you want to encourage the proliferation of the freemium piece, because you want to get in their toolkit, right? Because there is nothing more phenomenal than you get in somebody's toolkit. And sure, they might be the student in the Philippines today, but as soon as they go start that job, right, as the engineer at company X, boom. You're now in the toolkit, and as long as you can see that, and you can see that, they've now logged into the product or signed up as a product, but it's the same person. Previously used their Gmail address, now they're using their @Dropbox email. Okay, great. They heard, like, this isn't a fresh new lead. This is a lead with context, right? And so that's another, the resurfacing lead is another one piece of intel that we surface, where we say, hey, this user isn't new. We've seen this user before, and sure, they were at a different company, or they were in a different context, and they were, in the freemium tier, but now they're here, and it's a different context, and maybe this is the right time now for the salesperson to reach out based on that. So that's why I love these freemium models. You're in the toolkit. Huge advantage if you know how to leverage it.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Mitch, thanks for joining me. We have to wrap up here. So tell folks how they can contact you and find out more about Whalr, which is WHALR, no E.
That's right. Not the Boston Whaler, the boat.
Right.
We try to get that one. But, but yeah, you just hit the website, or just send me an email, mitch@whalr.com, and more than happy to help you. Really, the methodology of another customer references as the product qualified lead, right? Where really it's the PQL. And I'm just a huge proponent of whatever you do, regardless of whether you use Whalr, you need to start leveraging that in-product usage behavior, because it makes the buying experience much more valuable if you're a buyer, and the person reaching out to you actually has some context and how they can help you, right? So you absolutely need to be leveraging the PQL model and figure out a way, if you're a salesperson or a sales leader, even if you're an individual rep, figure out a way. You might have to go take the product manager out for coffee, or you might need to, go chum up one of the engineers, but figure out a way that you can get product usage, because pretty much every team nowadays through, different functions have the product usage. Usually it's product managers, but figure out a way that you can get some of the product uses, because if you can get that for even the leads that you're working or your opportunities, you are going to be have a huge advantage in again, the value that you can bring to helping that customer along. So PQL methodology is by far the thing that I hope people will really start to embrace, because it's quite powerful.
Okay, excellent.
All right.
Well, good. Mitch, we'll have you back on again. And friends, thank you for spending this time with me today. Please come back, join me again tomorrow. Got new episodes every day of the week. I'm sure you find something you enjoy. Until then, if you have a moment, please go to iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast and subscribe to the show. Leave a review. Your feedback's really important to me. So again, thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.